Save on your next oil change at O'Reilly Auto Parts. Choose Castrol Edge Full Synthetic Motor Oil to provide maximum performance and protection for your engine. Get a $15 gift card after rebate when you buy 5 quarts of Castrol Edge for $34.95. Plus 2 times O Rewards points. Offer valid in-store and online at O'ReillyAuto.com.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
All right, and welcome to Happily Never After. I'm Kate,
I'm Jay.
and here we're working on turning the page after spousal loss.
And you know, the great part about that is there is life after, going through what we've been through. Look, Kate, start with just telling your story and let's let the audience know, because I think that this show right here is going to be something dynamic that people will have the opportunity to understand that, you know what, there is life after a loss. So please start your
Yeah,
story.
absolutely. Yeah, like you said, Jay, today we're going to really be diving deep into our personal loss stories. And so I get the honor and the privilege of going first. So let's talk about loss, how I became a widow. So Craig and I have been married for almost 9 years at the time that he died. He passed away in November of 2020, not COVID related. I feel like I have to say that when I tell his story,
Right.
given what the condition of our world was like at that time, which was a weird place and a weird time to experience loss outside of the parameters of COVID, right? Like I'm sure the people who experienced loss because of COVID or related to COVID, that was hard enough. But to go through and navigate this whole wild experience outside of that context was like being in a vacuum. And I still suffered some of the repercussions, like visitations and stuff like that were so wild during that time. Um, so Craig and the kids were playing in our pool at our home over the summer. And he was a big guy, right? Like 6'3", 380 pounds, like linebacker, but giant teddy bear. And sometimes didn't really understand like how much space he took up, and got a little aggressive with his body, and he twisted his knee. We had a pool slide, and like it was fun to watch him like a little otter down the pool slide. But so fooling around with the kids in the pool, he twisted his knee. And like any typical man, I'm sure you're aware, like, nah, it's fine, like brushed it
Right,
off,
right.
I'll walk it off,
Put some dirt
right?
on it. Put some dirt on it.
Rub some dirt. He used to say that. Yep, rub some dirt on it. You're fine. And so I hobbled around the house for a couple days, just kind of complaining and rubbing his knee as he's watching the football game. I'm like, that bothers you, doesn't it? He's like, nah, it's fine. It's fine. About a week goes by, and I got sick of listening to him complain, as all wives do. And I finally was like, you need to go to the urgent care. I've got to go to work. So I worked retail. So it was a Saturday. So here I am off, and the kids both had play dates, and he was like, all right, fine. So he goes to the urgent care, and they look at it and they take some x-rays, and they're like, we don't really see anything, maybe some pre-arthritis. And he was like, don't say that. And
Right.
they were like, well, follow up with your orthopedic. So he comes home and he reports to me. And so I naturally, as the caretaker, was like, I'll call them right away. So I call the orthopedic and I make the appointment and I get him in, because I let him up to him. Let's be honest, how long that already took. Like it would have been a month before he got in. So I make the appointment. He goes into the orthopedic. They order an MRI and they say, like, we don't really see anything either, but let's do some physical therapy just to like help mitigate things and make sure there's no damage and keep things tracking.
Right.
So this pain was in his right knee. Well, he starts physical therapy. So he goes twice a week, and it was supposed to be a course of like 6 weeks. And about like 4 weeks in, the pain in his right knee went away, like was gone, which was great. But he started having like weird tingling and numbness in the left leg. Like the left knee started hurting and he got like radiant pain up his thigh and into like his hip. And, so we went back for our 6 week checkup after he finished
Right.
PT. He was telling the doctor about it. And the doctor kind of palpitated the area on his butt, like near his butt, and was like, oh, you're a man of a certain age, because Craig was older than me, 20 years my senior. Um, you know, I like my men like I like my scotch, well aged and full bodied. I'm just saying. But so he was like, oh, it's just sciatic nerve pain because you're compensating because you've been dealing with this. That made sense to us, right? Like that seemed logical. So he was like, gonna amend your PT therapy. You're gonna go back to PT and we'll get over this. And we're like, great. So he
Okay.
goes back to PT, drops it down to once a week for the doctor's orders. And like 3 weeks in, the leg starts going numb. And that's concerning to us. So we like call the
Right.
doctor, and the doctor was like, all right, let me see you. And we go in at like 4 weeks from that second appointment, and he goes, what's going on? Doesn't do any further physical evaluation, doesn't order any additional imaging, and just kind of talks to us. And he's like, well, that's normal. Like your body's going to take time to readjust, but I just wanted to like talk to you about it, which felt like a huge waste of time to me. I'm like, why call us in here, make us have an
Right.
appointment, pay for a copay? Because, orthopedics are outside your normal. And so it's a specialist, and gotta
Right.
love the medical industry. I digress.
Oh, no, you ain't said nothing but the thing. So I feel you.
Yeah, but so the doctor was like, just keep with the PT. All right. So he finishes his second round of PT. And at this point, like he starts falling down the stairs because the leg is like going just randomly numb and giving out.
Okay. Okay.
And so the initial injury was like end of July. This takes us through like mid-September. Now again, COVID's going on, right? So like nobody's going anywhere. We're not doing anything. We had a trip booked for our wedding anniversary. We were supposed to go to New Orleans, and the hotel called us and was like, hey, our roof collapsed, so you can't come.
Oh, okay.
And we were like, oh, what are we going to do? So we went to Vegas for our honeymoon, and we decided, we're like, you know what? Let's just go lock ourselves in a hotel room in Vegas and order room service for a weekend. And like, nobody's going to bother us. It's away from the kids. Like, my parents offered to babysit. It was just a nice little, getaway vacation, staycation. Even though we weren't staying at home, we were staying in somewhere else.
Look, that's a perfect lovers situation. And you're in
Right?
Vegas, you're locked up in the hotel. It's just two
Yep.
of y'all. It's all
And you
good.
know what? I'm not a gambler, and I don't know how it happened. So I hope like this doesn't change it by putting it out into the ether. But for whatever reason, MGM likes to send me reduced rates on rooms. So
Okay.
we got a room at the Bellagio with a fountain view for $65 a night.
J-
So
Yeah. Yo, let me explain something. When you get one of them vouchers, you need to give it to me. All right.
all right.
I'll-
I'll hook you up. Seriously though. And so like we had like flyer miles through Southwest or whatever, one of the airlines. So like the airline round trip for the plane was like
Yeah.
$99 for both of us.
Okay.
And so like it didn't cost us a lot. And we were like, this is perfect. Great, let's go. So we go for our anniversary. And the one thing I asked of him was like, let's go to a nice dinner, right, for our anniversary. And the
Right.
trip was great because we were just like hanging in the pool, and we didn't have to mask as long as we were in the pool. And we ordered, poolside cocktails, and then we were in the room just sitting in the robes, eating French toast in bed, watching trash TV. It was beautiful. It was wonderful, right? Couples massage at the spa, like it was beautiful. All those things. So then I asked to go to a nice dinner, and I don't know if you've ever been to Vegas, but like it's super walkable. Like the strip is long. It's like maybe 3 miles, but it's super walkable. Everything is like really compressed and like easy to get to. So we walked
Okay.
from the Bellagio, and we were only supposed to go 2 hotels down to a nice dinner. And we didn't even make it out of the courtyard of the Bellagio and like he had to sit down and rest because his leg was so weak and he was in pain. And we were late for dinner, and they like didn't hold our reservations. We were like a half hour late because he kept having to sit down every like
Right. Right.
50 feet. And me, I'm like, I understood, but this had been going on for weeks and I was getting kind of frustrated. And like, we left with enough time and he wasn't really communicating to me that he was in pain until he needed to sit down. And so my mind is just in like, we're going to be late. And he was a very like
Kate,
internal person, didn't share his
Kate,
process.
I'm going to tell you this. Seriously, it's a man thing. Look, you know how many
Totally is.
times, I was in pain and I wouldn't let Kim know because it's the same thing. I mean, Craig wasn't going to let you know because, look, we
We don't want
don't
to ruin
want
our
to show,
time. And
right, and we don't want to show weakness either. I mean, we just don't,
yeah,
you
he was
know,
trying to take care of me in his own way. Totally. That's
right,
absolutely how he was. But the fact is that it actually made things harder because he didn't share with me. And he wasn't a big
right,
sharer anyway. He was super introverted, had his own internal process. Like that took me a long time to learn and accept and be married to someone like that as an outrovert, an extrovert, a chatty Cathy. Like
right.
that was super like culture shock for me. But you're right, it is totally a dude thing, as I like to say. So, we missed dinner and we end up in this like huge fight while we're in Vegas. And that's when I really started to understand like how much pain he was in and like how I just thought it was like randomly numb or randomly weak. But no, it was like ongoing.
Right.
And he apparently had told the physical therapist about it and they kind of dismissed him. And so when we get back from Vegas, I call the doctor again and he didn't want to see us. He was like, finish your PT, don't worry about it. We'll follow up again. So Halloween comes around. So this is now end of October, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And Halloween, like the week before Halloween, rolls around, and he started having this like intense back pain, like lower back, kidney area. Like I saw him cry 3 times in his life that I knew him.
Right.
The day we
Right.
got married, the day my daughter was born, and the day before Halloween that year.
See,
So like it must
yeah,
have like
it hurt. It hurt.
it hurt. So every time he would lay down flat, it was like excruciating pain. So then Halloween came around and we do like family costumes. I used to make all of our costumes, and that year we did Jurassic Park. So like I was like Dr. Ellie Sattler, my daughter was a dinosaur, my son was Ned Leadry. I don't know, the guy who gets
Right.
eaten by the Dilophosaurus, and then he was like the old guy with the hat, like welcome to Jurassic Park. Like, and he was perfect for it. I'll have to show you the picture sometime. Um, but he couldn't even walk with us to go trick or treating. He was in that much pain and there was that much weakness. So he drove his car like 3 miles an hour following me and my kids as we're going door to door trick or treating. And then we had to cut it early because just sitting in the car was painful for him. That's not like him. So like it was not good.
Right.
So
I feel
I
you.
had been calling the doctor, the orthopedic, periodically throughout this whole time, like asking questions, like, is this normal? Telling them about the back pain. And they were just like, oh, take Tylenol, back and muscle, or put some icy hot on it, or try
Right.
hot showers, or all those things. And we had an adjustable base bed. So like he was sleeping in the zero gravity position, quote. Um, and then it was like 2 o'clock in the morning after just not sleeping, he would finally get up and go down to the bathroom and stand in the shower for like an hour, letting the hot water beat on it because that was the only thing that really just alleviated the pain.
The pain.
And it was enough to like bring it down. He would come back to bed and then roll around for the rest of the night, just uncomfortable and in pain. So, beginning in November, and I was a retail manager for a luxury store at the time. So, like, work was crazy for me, right? Like, we're getting ready for Black Friday. It was my first holiday season as a store manager. So, like, retail, you're never home anyway. But this was like
Right.
extra not home. I was working like open to close, and with COVID hours, it was like covering shifts when people were calling out and all this other stuff. And then I remember I was at work. It was November 11th, and I was supposed to do the closing shift. So I'd just gotten there for like 2 p.m. and like 5 o'clock rolls around. And we had the type of relationship where like we were texting all the time, and you know, he called me. And so I like knew something serious was up. And I was
Okay,
like, like,
yeah.
hey babe, what's going on? The first thing out of his mouth was, I can't get off the couch. And I was like, what do you mean you can't get off the couch? And he was like, I can't feel my legs. And I like kind of like stopped, like everything I was doing kind of just like faded into the background.
Right,
And
right.
I paused, and before I could even say anything else, he goes, and I'm pretty sure I just soiled myself, but I can't tell. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm on my way. So I like called my assistant store manager, had her come in to cover me. I called my boss. I told her there was a family emergency, and I left and I drove home. And like my parents were living with us at the time, adult disabled parents. Um, so like they're cognizant and able-bodied for the most part. So like I think my mom was making dinner, and my dad was like helping out with laundry, and the kids were home because it was evening. So like Craig was, watching TV on the couch, and my son was sitting next to him, and my daughter, who was 18 months old at the time, was just kind of like toddling around on him and playing with him. And he was himself from the waist up. But you could tell, like just the look on his face, the heaviness in his face, that he was uncomfortable and that something was wrong. So I like took one look at him, and I kind of was like, what's going on? And he looked at me and he's like, something's not right. I was like, okay. So I call the on-call line for the orthopedic, and the doctor called me back right away. And it was a doctor we hadn't dealt with before. And I kind of start to explain it to him, and he was like, hold up, hold up, hold up. Let me stop you right there. And he asked, like, he's numb? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, go to the emergency room yesterday, basically. And I was like, well, he can't get off the couch. He goes, then call the ambulance. Do not wait. Hang up with me, call the ambulance. So now I'm like freaking out.
Freaking out. Yeah.
But like I can tell he's freaking out. So I'm trying to like project manage what's happening.
Right.
Not freak out for the kids, not freak out. But I'm like, okay. So I explained to him kind of in his ear what I'm going to do, what the doctor said. And he was like, well, if that's what we have to do. He was just that kind of person, right? Like, this is what we're doing. So I call the ambulance, and they load him in, and, I couldn't ride with him because of COVID. And I remember like we had a raised garage, like our garage was above our living room, or I mean, our living room was above our garage. Um, and so like I remember looking back up, and the kids are with my mom, like looking out the window as the ambulance pulls away. And I'm like getting in the car, and I like wave to my daughter, who's like a baby at the time, right? And
Right.
I can hear my mom like, blow daddy a kiss, say goodbye. If only we had known that was the last time my kids would have seen my husband.
Right. Right.
And I think about that like as my kids are older now and like going through grief, like, oof, it's, oof, yuck. Like that makes that yucky belly feeling, you know?
Uh, look, that's the
Sorry.
hardest thing because look, Kate, first off, it's mad rough. And like you said, you're looking at you're looking at your children, and everybody's thinking, hey, look, daddy'll be fine. He'll be back. You know,
Yeah. Especially because he was normal from the waist up. Like
right.
it wasn't like like a long-term illness, or like he was incapacitated, or there was a head trauma or a wound, or he was himself, just couldn't stand
Right.
up. So we drive to the hospital, which is like 20 minutes away, and it was like kind of freezing rain, and I'm like not great driving at night, so I'm like trying to follow the ambulance, and then somehow I ended up like beating them there. Then that was like nerve-wracking for me. So I end up parking in the parking garage, and I like race, and I get told you can't come in to be with him because of COVID until he's triaged and in a room. So here I am, November, and it's like 30 degrees, and I'm just sitting in my car in the parking garage. I sat there for 3 hours, like 3.5 hours in the car in the parking garage. So like we got to the hospital, it was like 7 o'clock at night. It was like after 11:30 when he finally got triaged. In that time, he started like vomiting because he was numb from the waist down. He couldn't evacuate his bowels. So like his
Right.
digestive tract was so backed up that it literally like was pushing it out the other way.
Right.
And
Right. He was
because
throwing it
there was
up.
no, yeah. So like because there was no room for him, he's literally sitting on a gurney in the hallway, like covered in urine, vomiting on himself, left to his own devices for like 3 hours. And him and I are texting, and I'm like occasionally calling him, and then you can tell he's getting increasingly frustrated because I'm frustrated and about the whole situation. So I'm like calling the nurses station, like, yo, like, what in the actual hell could someone get him like
Yeah.
a bucket
Some help.
or
Yeah.
like a privacy screen or like could someone like some anti-nausea medicine? Like, we can't prescribe him anything until he's triaged. I'm like, this is awful. Like, what a horrific thing for him to experience, let alone anything else. Like, to be such a well able bodied, independent person, to be so completely helpless and dependent, and then to basically be ignored. And I couldn't be there for him. Like, that felt awful. So he finally calls me, not the nurse, not the doctor, not anybody. He finally calls me to tell me, hey, I'm in a room. I've been in here for 20 minutes. You can come in now. So, mind you, I'm like heated as hell at that point.
Right. Right.
Hell have no fury like a white woman scorn. Let's just be real. Like, I'm about to pull a Karen up in there. I was mad. But in all seriousness, like I was frustrated because like there was such a lack of like
Yeah.
care, there was such a lack of empathy, there was such a lack of like communication with these people who are supposed to be taking care
Professional.
of him.
Right.
Yeah, it was so frustrating and disheartening. So I go into the room and there's like, I don't know, a whole bunch of people. And they start by doing a COVID test, right? Like we have to. It was negative. And then they do a bladder scan because he had soiled himself, was just continually like
Right.
leaking urine everywhere. And so they do an ultrasound of the bladder to find out like that it's full. And so they do a straight catheterization, which I don't know if you know what that is, but
I
they
do.
tap the keg,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
that was super uncomfortable to watch. And I don't even have that equipment. Let's just be real. I was like,
Listen,
oh,
let me explain something. The fact that you have to go up there and that's hard. That's ugly.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That's a whole nother story. Go ahead. Go ahead, man. Because I don't even
I was
want to
like,
think about it. I don't want to think about
everyone out there is like
it.
crossing their legs now, right? Like, forget
Right,
about
right.
it.
Yeah, because I'm
Uh,
seeing now. I'm like,
bring it
oh
back.
God. You know,
Yeah. So we had to do that. And then they just like unleashed this battery of tests on him. He had a contrast MRI. He had an X-ray. He had an endoscopy. He had basically a colonoscopy. He had a spinal tap. He had several blood draws. He had a psychological evaluation because they wanted to make sure it wasn't all in his head. We had the infectious disease doctor come in. All of these people come back and say, we don't know why you're numb.
right, right.
We don't know why you're numb. And so we spent from 7 p.m. when he first got there until 5 in the morning in the emergency room. And they said, well, we don't know what's wrong, so we're going to admit you. And then they turned and looked at me and said, Mrs. Mollison, visiting hours start at noon. You can come back then. And, in not so many words, showed me the door. Excuse me. So they put him upstairs in a room. Now, mind you, I haven't slept yet. I had been at work, the day
Right.
before. I'm a habitual insomniac anyway, so I'm operating on like maybe 6 hours of sleep over 3 days at this point. So I drive the 20 minutes home. I put together a bag. He had sleep apnea, so I grabbed his CPAP machine. I
Right.
grabbed his like a comb and a razor and a little toiletry
Right.
bag.
Right.
Change of clothes, his slippers, like whatever, his sweatpants, that kind of stuff. His phone charger. I grabbed all that stuff and I go back. And with COVID restrictions where we were, you had to like stand in line outside the main entrance of the hospital and like show your ID. And then they would give you a sticker, and that sticker was valid for 2 hours. And then, because they had security guards on every floor, they would kick you out after 2 hours, and you'd have to go back downstairs and stand in that line again and get a new sticker. So I did that twice. Went up, saw him for 2 hours, and then got kicked out, and then went back down and stood in line for like an hour, and then went back up. And the second time I went back up, right as I was coming in, a doctor came in, and he introduced himself, and he said, "I'm the IR doctor." And him and I kind of looked at each other and we're like, "What's that?" And so it's intravenous radiology. Still didn't know what that meant, but he's like, "We think we know what's wrong with you after reviewing all of your tests, but in order to confirm your diagnosis, we have to do exploratory surgery." We're like, "Okay, what's wrong?" He goes, "Well, I don't exactly want to tell you until we confirm it, because if it's not, we don't want to scare you." And so here we're thinking like, "Oh my God, it's a tumor, it's cancer."
Right.
Oh my. And so him and I are like freaking out. So the 13th, so the next day, Friday the 13th, they do this exploratory spinal surgery, and they go in and they look at his spine, and they come back, and the surgery went well. It was super quick. It was like 3 hours, which is quick apparently for surgery, which I'm like biting my nails the whole time. I was a nervous Nelly with him because he'd been to the hospital a whole bunch because he had a cardiac condition. So like me and him in the hospital didn't get along well. So here I am like on the edge of my seat as it is. And now we're talking like spinal stuff, and we don't know what's going on. And I'm already thinking like, Jesus, this is cancer. He goes through surgery, goes through recovery. He comes back. They removed the catheter that they had put in to do surgery, and they continued to just straight cap him at that point, which made no sense to me. I'm like, why? He's numb. Why aren't we just leaving in the catheter?
Right.
Put a pin in that. Put a pin in that. We'll circle back. So he says, "You have a condition that we suspected, and it's something called atriovascular fistulation." And I was like, that is a whole lot of letters all at once. So, right? Like that is a, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. That's what you have.
Right.
So basically what that means is typically it's a birth defect that isn't discovered until people are elderly or much older. And it's usually diagnosed when people develop arthritis and start doing arthritic treatments and care. And so because he had this injury that then resulted in the sciatic pain, it exacerbated this birth condition, and we were able to find it earlier. So the doctor was like super excited that we discovered it, 30 years earlier than we probably would have. He's like, super fixable, really great prognosis. We're going to go back in the same way we just did with surgery. We're going to, fix it. And what the atriovascular fistulation is, it's basically a knot of blood vessels that think that they're arteries. So the blood flow is the wrong direction. And because the vessels are knotted, blood will pool in those vessels. Because of where his was, it was compressing his spine. And that's why he was numb. And the numbness had been so ongoing since June, basically, like that slow uptick in compression. That's why he became incontinent. It was just a whole system shutdown of that nerve that was being compressed. We were like, oh, that makes perfect sense. What's the fix? We're going to go in and we're going to inject a medical grade adhesive into those malfunctioning arteries. The good news is none of them are feeding the spine. So, with rehab, because you've been weak for so long, you'll be able to regain probably 98% of your motion and feeling. Anything you don't recover is negligible. It's a great prognosis. We were like, cool, that seems easy. It's not cancer. We celebrated. We're like, yeah. I was like, I went out and bought steak dinner and went back and had dinner with him at the hospital that night. We're like, victory, we win. Little did I know. So he has the surgery.
You know what?
Isn't it funny? We celebrate those things and then comes back to bite us in the ass just a few days later.
Because you get some good news, and you want to live on that good news, and then they hit you with the part two. They always hit you with a part two.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's not like it was a tumor and it was an operable tumor, and then he was going to have to do chemo. And not to minimize that experience for people, but like we weren't in that situation. So for us, it's like, great, we have the surgery, he does the rehab, it's fixed, we're back to normal, we're back whole again. Like easy peasy lemon squeezy. No, it turns out it was difficult, lemon difficult. So we we had the surgery on the 16th. It took 3 hours longer than it was supposed to have. So again, here I'm like freaking out. He gets out of surgery and it was a success. They were like really encouraged by it. He's in the recovery room and he's already able to like barely wiggle his like big toe on one foot. So we were like jumping up and down. We're like, awesome, huge, great progress. We weren't expecting that. Even the doctor was like, that's not normal. That's awesome. Like, that's a huge, good green flag. There was no bed for him on the floor. So he had to spend the night in the operation room recovery, like the PACU is what they call it.
Right.
So he had to spend the night there. What I learned later on was that they didn't put the compression booties, like they are Velcro booties that they're supposed to put
Oh, I
on
know
you.
the things to atrophy, to prevent atrophy. Yeah.
Yeah, so like to keep the blood flow moving, they didn't put
Right.
those on him in the recovery overnight. Now, mind you, he was a big man, again, 360, 380, 6'3", with a heart condition, with sleep apnea, who had been numb, immobile for several weeks, and just had a surgery to mitigate, nerve compression.
Right.
And they did not put the compression booties on him postoperatively. So that happened. And again, I didn't know that until probably a good month after he had passed. So we thought it was a really great sign. He could wiggle the toes. Again, they took the catheter out after surgery. They put a catheter in to have surgery, and then they took the catheter out after surgery. Why? Why are we continuing to straight catheterize him? And I finally complained at that point because I'm like, you've put it in twice now, and you're coming in every 2 hours like clockwork just to empty his bladder because he has no feeling. Why aren't we just leaving a catheter in?
Right.
It didn't make sense to me. Like that felt like a mismanagement of care. So he gets a room on, because he had spinal surgery, he had to go to like the neurological floor, technically.
Okay.
And because it was like a spinal column issue, it feeds the brainstem. So that's how they like organize that, I guess. So we end up on that floor and he's up there for a couple days. And in the meantime, like I'm still going to work and like going home and spending time with the kids. And I'm only allowed to be there basically like 4 hours max a day. So I'm going up for my 2 hours, getting kicked out, going back down, standing in line, and then going home for an hour and then coming back. And then like, I'm still like managing my time between my full-time retail job and my staff, because I was the manager, and my 2 kids at home and my adult disabled parents, and then now him, and going to bed at night every night with an empty bed and like trying to juggle all the things. So I was spent. I was like, not even exhausted, but I was just like spent.
You were done. I mean,
we'd been doing this for, he'd only been in the hospital for like a week and a half at that point. But like we'd been doing this dance of him not sleeping and me being up to be sympathetic and try to be helpful and get him stuff and put the icy hot on and get him the Tylenol and, rub his back and help him try to get to sleep. I've been doing that for months at this point. So, and then to just not sleep when he's not there, because I slept better when he was in bed with me. I literally wasn't sleeping at this point.
Of course.
And in no way, shape, or form did we think that it was going to end the way it all ended. So he had to coordinate care, or I say we had to coordinate care with the rehab hospital, because once he got discharged from the hospital after surgery, the doctor had said he would need to go to a rehab to like relearn how to walk, basically, regain strength and control in his legs, bladder train, because that's a feeling and it takes time apparently if you've been without it for so long. So I'm also case managing him. Like I'm calling his HR department at work and putting in for short-term disability and keeping his boss informed. And then I'm like the case coordinator between the hospital and the rehab hospital. And I'm like all the insurance company, all these moving parts that I'm now managing. So I get him into the rehab hospital that was local, really top rated. His sister had survived a brain aneurysm several months prior, and this is the hospital that she was at. So we wanted to be where family was. It made sense to us. So we get that care. coordinated and we set up the transfer date. So they were going to come and get him on the 20th, and that was a Friday. The transport was scheduled to pick him up at 2 p.m. I actually had a job interview that day because I was looking for new job opportunities that would have like better career advancement because I'd kind of hit a ceiling with my current employer. So I left him at like 1, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go to my job interview. I'll call you after it's over. Let me know what's going on, everything like that, right? As I'm getting ready to leave, oh, let me back up. I missed a part. Don't you hate that with grief? Like when you like not misremember, but like you remember an extra piece. Oh, geez. I hate that. Your audio cut out. Your audio cut out. Do you need to stop the recording or pause it and then come back? Because that'll be able to be edited out. There you are.
All right.
There you are. Perfect. Yeah, that worked out well because then, so Eric, when you hear this, where I misremember, just cut that part out and start from this point now. So the transport, like I said, was scheduled for the 20th. And I was with him for a little bit in the morning. I had a job interview that was upcoming, and I had to leave at like 1, but it was like 11 o'clock in the morning. And the nurse comes in and he was like, oh, Mr. Mollison, we have your discharge papers. We're just going to get that taken care of because we have to discharge you so transport can take, quote, ownership of you when they get here.
Right.
There's no reason for you to like hang out, whatever, obviously, because you're not getting up and walking anywhere. But it just takes care of things. And we're like, cool, we love the efficiency of it. They bring in the discharge papers, he signs it, I get all his stuff packed up, I help him, make sure everything's together, I kiss on him, he wishes me luck, and I leave at like 1. And right as I'm leaving, I'm walking down the hallway by the nurse's station, I see transport. We like pass each other in the hallway, like 2 ships in the night. And I was like, oh good, they're early. Also, things I learned later on, his next dose of heparin, the blood thinner, was due at 1:30. So because his discharge papers came through at 11, his prompt for medication never came through the computer, so nobody brought him that medication.
Right.
So there's another oversight. So I leave, I go to my job interview. It went really well. I got immediately invited to a second round. So I'm like on the phone with him driving home, like super excited. And he's telling me, that he just got to the rehab hospital and there was like a huge argument going on between 2 like residents or, patients.
Right.
And so he was waiting for intake to happen. Intake was supposed to happen around like 4:30. He was supposed to get his nighttime medication, which I believe also included another medication that would have mitigated blood clots and stuff. And dinner, he was supposed to get that by 6. He didn't start intake until 9:40 p.m. They had to like call the kitchen and have them make a special dinner and bring it up to him separately. So like he sat there in that room listening to this argument out in the hallway, not getting dinner because everyone was preoccupied with the shenanigans that were going on in the hallway. And I was furious to hear that. But I was like, okay. The visitation at the rehab hospital was different. And again, due to COVID, all of the restrictions were like super stringent. So the rehab hospital didn't have like open visitation like the hospital did. You had to schedule a visit. And so this is now when I get in contact with the rehab coordinator for visitation, this is now the 23rd. So I'm at work. So it is 3 days before Thanksgiving. And I'm like, okay, like when can I come see him? And they're like, oh, you can come on his birthday on the 25th. And I was like, perfect. Because I felt awful that he was going to have to spend his birthday in the rehab hospital. And they were like, you can also come on Thanksgiving. And I was like, great. So I scheduled those 2 visitations. The 23rd, the night of the 23rd, I call him and I'm talking to him and I'm telling him like I scheduled these visitations and that I've been in contact with his job and we figured all that stuff out. And then I start to cry because I was just like so burnt out at this point. Like so much had happened. And I know it had been going on since June, but like it felt like I was running a marathon and I was just exhausted. And I was so sick of sleeping alone. And I say sleeping lightly. And I said that to him. I was like, I'm just so sick of this bed being empty and I just miss you so much. And he never in our whole lives together yelled at me or snapped at me or anything like that. And he barked at me. It was like, stop it. And I was like, what? He was like, every time we talk, it can't be about how much you miss me. You have to understand I feel so helpless and I'm so frustrated, and there's not a
Right.
damn thing I can do about it. And like that kind of shook me because I wasn't used to him talking to me that way. Thinking about it now, I'm like, oh, he must have been like having some feels, and it really was like challenging for him. And so I kind of like pack all my feelings up and are like, you're right, I'm sorry. And, we say goodnight and he tells me he loves me. And, I was like, all right, I'll text you tomorrow. He was like, okay, I have my first physical therapy and occupational therapy session. So we'll see how that goes. I was like, okay, great. So that night, I really just needed an emotional outlet. Like I needed to cry. And there's one movie that like guaranteed, I don't care what I'm feeling, one movie will make me cry every time, guaranteed. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's called P.S. I Love You.
Nah,
It's a
that
great, oh my God, it's so great. Um, unless you're a widow. Um,
right.
so it's Hilary Swank, and basically it's a story about a woman who loses her husband, and she goes through the next year of like reconciling that loss. If that wasn't foreshadowing from the universe, I don't know what is.
Right.
So I pick that movie and I watch it and I have my good cry, like hard cry. You know that hard cry when like your face hurts afterwards? Like you got to go to the
Yes.
mirror and like
Yes.
watch yourself cry to make sure it's real.
And
That
like
like
the snot
the
is coming
snot
down
bubbles
and
and like that
yeah.
cry where your face is just like raw and
Yes.
swollen afterwards. It was that cry, but it was
Okay.
so good. It was so cathartic. I
So you
literally
needed
cried
it.
myself to
You
sleep.
needed it.
I did. I really needed that like release. Oh boy, if I had known how much crying I was gonna do, I probably would have been like, nah, I'm good. So so I watched the movie, I go to sleep. I text him in the morning and it was like, I don't know, 8 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, hey baby, like I love you. Like I hope you have great physical therapy today. He texts me back and he's like, I love you too. I'm really sorry about last night. I was like, me too. He's like, I just finished PT and I've got OT at 10 o'clock. And I was like, okay, like keep me posted. Let me know how it goes. And that was kind of it. And I went to work and I text him at like 9:40 and I text him, I was like, good luck with your class. And I really hope that things go well and I love you. And I didn't hear anything back, which was kind of odd. He was pretty quick about, like responding. And about 20 minutes later, I got a phone call and I'm at work at this point. Like I was doing opening stuff. So I'm, sitting at the computer and I'm typing and I get a phone call and so, I answer it and it's like, hi, Mrs. Mollison, this is Dr. Pesh at the Hartford, the hospital for special care, like the rehab hospital where your husband is. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to go and visit him tomorrow, like all perky and shit. And he's like, just wanted to let you know, his heart stopped and you should probably go to New Britain General. And he was like, kudos to him. He was so cool as a cucumber because like I didn't even register what he said initially.
Right.
He then went on to like explain, he was like, like we had to do CPR, but like it's okay. We did get his heart restarted. And I'm like, yeah, okay, like, what? And I like had to have him repeat himself. And so then I'm like scrambling and I'm like getting all my stuff together and I'm like texting my assistant store manager, like, I need you to cover. And I'm like, leaving work and I like locked the door and freaking out. Now, mind you, I'm bad with directions, right? I think I said that already. Also short-term memory problems, apparently. So like I'm trying to like look up the address and like figure out what's going on and like call my brother-in-law and like so like I'm all over the place. I'm a crazy mess. Driving like a lunatic. Like my middle name should have been Andretti because skirt
You
skirt.
was going. You was zooming.
I was just going. I think I went down a wrong way street, like at one point, like the wrong way down a one-way street at one point. I find myself at the hospital and I like burst into the emergency room and I'm like, where is the sky is falling. And nobody knows
Right.
what the hell I'm talking about. Like nobody, they're like, who are you talking about? We don't have anyone here. And I'm like, oh my God, I messed up. I'm at the wrong hospital. So I'm like trying to call the doctor. I'm like freaking out. And then they put me in a family waiting room. And that should have been the first clue. But here I thought they just didn't want me, bothering other people, right? No. So they put me in this family waiting room and a social worker comes in and bless her heart, but she was like a baby in comparison. Now I'm not old. I feel old some days, but I'm not old by any stretch of the imagination. So for me to look at her and be like, whoo, you a child. Like,
Right.
she was green. She was green. Well intended, obviously well educated, but everything out of her mouth was just wrong in every possible way, and she's like asking me these questions and my brain isn't working. And here I'm trying to call his, older children. He had 4 children from his first marriage who are all adults. So I'm like, I don't know what's going on, blah, blah, blah. She tells me that basically his heart stopped like 3 more times and it took them a half an hour to get his heart restarted. And then they loaded him onto the bus and they had to pull over twice to get his heart started again. And that's why I beat him there. So then she's like with me and she's saying all these things. And I finally look at her and I was like, excuse me, are you married? Do you have children? No? Then respectfully shut the hell up. And I
Right.
basically just like motioned to the door and was like, you
Right.
can excuse yourself. So she left. She comes back like what felt like an eternity. I don't even know how much time. And she's like, oh, you can see him now. And so my mind is like, he'll probably be, unconscious, but he's fine because they weren't like, there's a problem at any point in this. They're like, oh, you can see him now. And I'm like, great. They walk me down the end of a hallway and it's like the last room. It's like that horror movie, Last House on the Left. This was like Last Bay on the left. And there's a whole bunch of befuddling happening behind a curtain. And all I remember is like the social worker and a security guard and this doctor who walks out from behind the curtain. They're all like, can we get a chair? Can we get a chair? Someone get her a chair. And I'm finally like, I don't want your stupid freaking chair. Like, what in the shit is going on? And the doctor looks at me and she says, Mrs. Mollison, your husband's heart is weak. And even if we get it restarted, his brain has been without oxygen for over 90 minutes. He's essentially not there anymore. And I basically looked at her and was like, I don't care. Do something, fix it.
Right.
And she's like, we've already given him 3 times the dose of epinephrine for someone of his size. There's nothing else I can do. And I was like, do it again. And she was like, okay, I'll try one more time. But after that, I unfortunately have to call it. And I was like, no, there's no calling anything. They pull the curtain back. And this is all like very out of body experience. Like I'm watching a movie. And there is this man who is completely unrecognizable. This big, loving, articulate, intelligent teddy bear of a man is stark frickin' naked on a backboard with a collar, intubated with like several IV lines coming out of him. And he has this chest compression machine hooked up to him, which apparently they had to put on him in the ambulance. Now, I don't know if you know what a chest compression machine is.
I do.
Or if you've ever seen one.
I do.
1 out of 5 stars. Do not recommend. Nobody should see that thing in action because this 360, 380-pound man came straight up off the bed about 2 feet every 30 seconds or so. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk.
Right,
And that was like, it is compressing. It is literally doing the compressions for people. But to like the physics just didn't make sense to me, how they could just get this man in the air that effortlessly, that repetitively. It was mind-boggling. And now I understand why they wanted me to have a chair, because I like fell to the floor and I screamed. And they tried to pick me up and I basically threw the chair, and then they threatened to kick me out, the security guard, which I was like, do you not see what's happening here?
Right.
I remember crawling through the social worker's legs. Like I crawled through like a kid in a tunnel, right? Excuse me. I crawled through her legs, and the doctor like stopped and stood in front of me. It was like, "You can't be in here." And all I remember saying was like, "There's no way in hell my husband's gonna die without knowing that I'm here." Whew. So I like clung onto his foot, right? Like his foot, and he was tall, so his feet were like hanging off the edge of the gurney.
Right.
And so I like hugged his foot to like my face. And I hate feet. So if you know anything about me, like I hate feet. So it must have been serious if I'm like embracing his foot to my face. And she was like, "Fine, but you have to stay right there." And I very vividly remember like glancing up and looking at the digital clock that was on the wall and seeing the time, and it was like 10:37. And I'm like stroking his leg and talking to him, and they're all like just muddling around him, and it was just bedlam. And then the next thing I know, she says, "Time of death, 10:42." And I like scream in this way that just like reverberated through my whole body, and they start like very almost immediately disconnecting things and like packing things up. And I remember like screaming, like, "Why aren't you helping him? Somebody do something. Why aren't you helping him?" And then that very quickly changed. And I don't know at what point, but that changed to "Stop touching him, get your hands off of him, leave him alone." Like they tried to like rotate him to take the backboard away. And I was just like, "Leave him alone, leave him alone." To again, the point where the security guard came over because I guess I apparently threatened one of them. And I don't remember that, where I was like, "I'll beat you if you don't stop touching him," or something. Where the social or the security guard was like, "You can't threaten our staff. If you do that again, I'm going to have to remove you." Um, and I turned to him and I was like, "Did your husband just die? No, leave me alone."
Right.
And so they, obviously like they disconnect everything. And then I just remember them like dimming the lights and closing the door. And then there I was alone.
Okay. Um, First off, I'm gonna say this. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Second thing is, you know what? Kids was crazy. When you hear my story, you're gonna hear elements of your story in my story. You know, look, we just want to say thank you, all of the listeners, for really taking time to listen to our show today. I mean, if you enjoyed what you heard, please, subscribe to our channel. You know, I'm Jay, and this is Kate, and until next time, we look forward to talking to you again. I mean, this this is a very hard subject, no matter what, and the fact that Kate and I are brave enough to just relive this over and over. You know, um, look, we understand what's going on out here with with losing a spouse and everything else that's applied to it, whether it's a hospital related issue, whether it's a funeral related issue, whatever it is. Again, we
It's
understand that's why the show is here.
and it's part of the healing journey, right? For us to share. Like it's not intended for
Absolutely.
us to relive that trauma, but it's important for the healing process to be able to like speak it into truth and to share it with people. They say that grief is a language, right? That you don't learn until you encounter it. And I
Right.
think the important piece, that's what I want people to take away from my story, is I don't want to be pitied. I know it's a super traumatic story to hear. And so, apologies for anyone who felt triggered or traumatized. But I think that it's important to note that the more I say it, the more I tell it, the more affirmed it is. Not that it wasn't real before, right? But like that it gives validity to people who are also experiencing it and don't have the opportunity to tell their story in a safe place. Like I want our listeners to feel like they can share. Just as a note, I'll say like let's have Eric edit out that outro that you did, because that recap that you did is really great. I want to make sure that we like tie it up in a bow so people
Okay.
aren't being left with the trauma. So everything you just said was perfect. And I think leaving that in and that little back and forth dialogue. And then let's make sure we're splitting it, because I'll do the if you enjoyed what you heard, I'll say that just like we split the beginning, we'll split the
Okay.
end.
Okay.
So it's like we want to thank you for listening to today's show is what you would say. And then I'll say, if you enjoyed what you heard today, make sure you subscribe. And then I'll say, with grief and gratitude, I'm Kate. And you'll say, I'm Jay. Thanks for listening, kind of something like that. And that'll be a nice way to wrap it up. But if Eric could just take that little summary of my story and what the purpose of this is, that would be a great like tail end of the episode. So if that can be edited to there, I think that would make sense. So why don't we just do the outro now, if
Just the
that makes sense
outro?
for you.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can, if you wanted to, now that I've said my little piece about the purpose of the show, I'll say,
Well, let me
and on
ask
our
you
next
this.
episode, so we're just fine tuning, Eric, if you're listening, we're just fine tuning the recap of my story. So I gave my feedback on it. Jay had given some feedback on it. So cut out the outro that he did before his feedback, do the feedback and my feedback. And now he's going to wrap it up. And then we're going to re-record the intro and the outro.
I just wanted to say, like I said, Kate, thank you for sharing your story. It's harrowing, but again, it's a good opportunity to be able to let others know that, you can find a way to move forward through the challenges of what you've gone through. So again, I just wanted to say thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I know next time we're going to be hearing the story of how you lost your wife, Kim. So I want to thank you in advance for being willing to be transparent about that experience as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, we want to thank the audience just for simply listening to today's show.
If you enjoyed what you heard today, just make sure that you all subscribe so you can access the full episode and future episodes for all of this important conversation and content we're going to be bringing to you guys. With grief and gratitude, I'm Kate.
And I'm Jay. Until the next time, we'll touch base.
Perfect. Now let's do. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Happily Never After. I'm Kate.
I'm Jay. Here, we're working on turning the page after spousal loss.
And on today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you all the story of how I became a widow.
You've been listening to Happily Never After, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Happily Never After, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.